Back in 1845, a 27-year-old man, Harvard-educated, with no steady profession and not a penny saved, did something that scandalized New England. He borrowed an axe, walked into the woods, and built, with his own hands, a cabin about 13 feet long to live alone by the edge of a pond. The neighbors laughed at what they considered a theatrical performance, and the local newspapers called him eccentric, when they didn't simply call him a failure. And when his mother and sisters, worried about their boy out in the forest, started showing up with fresh bread and clean laundry, and when he himself began having dinner from time to time at his friend Emerson's house, the gossip ran wild through town. "Look at that," they said, "the sage of the woods, still eating his mother's bread." For more than a century, that little detail was used to belittle him, as if it were the final proof of a fraud. Not because what he observed was wrong, but because it was so uncomfortably accurate about the emptiness of ordinary lives that it threatened all the certainties people built to prop up their routines. What Henry David Thoreau jotted down in that cabin wasn't about running away from the world or being self-sufficient in some literal sense. It was about the fundamental psychological sickness that operates in every choice you make today, in your job, in your shopping cart at the grocery store, in your weekend schedule, and especially in the attention you spend on other people's lives instead of tending to your own. And once you understand what he actually diagnosed, you'll never look at your full house the same way again, and you'll never waste another whole afternoon worrying about your neighbor's life. Because here's what few people tell you about Thoreau. He wasn't teaching anyone to abandon civilization. He was exposing the silent captivity, the voluntary servitude in which nearly every modern adult gets tangled up, thinking they're building freedom. And the people who mocked him during his lifetime, fixating on his mother's baskets and ignoring what he wrote, did so precisely because they themselves were the most loyal prisoners of the very system he was describing. Today we're going to dive into what Thoreau actually observed, the concrete observations that explain why, with so much at your disposal, you still feel that nameless exhaustion when you close the front door at the end of the workday, with the weight of the key still warm in the palm of your hand. Before we go on, drop a comment with the word freedom. That's the theme of this video, and I want to know how many people are ready to take an honest look at their own lives. The idea behind the title of this video, "If you want to be free, stop complicating your life," is the modern distillation of something Thoreau wrote in 1854, in a country that still rode horse-drawn carriages, in a world without the constant noise we live in today. His exact words, in Walden, were a little different. He wrote, "Simplify, simplify," and later on, our life is frittered away by detail. The substance of the message is exactly what the title captures. Cut back what's left over, subtract the unnecessary, and you'll discover, maybe for the first time, what freedom truly means. Even though it was written nearly 2 centuries ago, this message feels like it was written for the adult who opens the banking app with a knot in their stomach at 8 in the morning, or for the father who realizes, on a Sunday afternoon, that he barely watched his kids grow up. Henry David Thoreau was a 19th century American philosopher and essayist, the author of Walden, published in 1854, and the essay On the Duty of Civil Disobedience, published in 1849. He lived for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days in a cabin on the shores of Walden Pond in Massachusetts, with the stated goal of testing, in his own body, the hypothesis that most of what we call necessity is actually expendable. There are already other videos on this channel detailing his biography, so today the focus isn't the man's life. It's the idea he left behind. And it's exactly about honesty that we need to talk before going any further, because there's a recurring criticism that comes up every time someone mentions Thoreau, and it deserves to be answered head-on. That gossip I mentioned at the beginning, about his mother's baskets, about the dinners at the Emerson house, about the supposed family dependence of a man who preached independence, needs to be addressed right now, because it's both factually true and deeply dishonest in its conclusion. Thoreau, in Walden, hides none of this. What you have is a lazy reader latching onto a biographical detail to avoid facing the philosophical argument. Walden was never about absolute isolation, nor about radical self-sufficiency in the literal sense of producing every calorie, sewing every piece of clothing, and chopping every log alone. Walden is about living deliberately, about consciously choosing what comes in and what goes out of your own existence. Thoreau could accept bread from his mother and still fully complete the experiment he set out to do, because the experiment wasn't a performance of asceticism. It was a philosophical investigation into what is actually necessary for a full human life. Whoever clings to the detail about the baskets is usually doing something deeper and might not even realize it. They're looking for an excuse not to change their own life. If Thoreau can be discredited, then the reader doesn't have to look at their crowded house, their packed schedule, their breathless life. They can keep going as they are. They can laugh at the philosopher of the woods and go back to scrolling their phone feed without guilt, with the blue light glowing on the ceiling at 11:47 at night. It's a predictable psychological move, attacking the messenger to dodge the message. But the mature adult watching this video is old enough to recognize that trap in themselves. And now they can, if they choose, set it aside. Look directly at what Thoreau said, separate from the man who said it, and ask, without protecting themselves, whether it applies to their own life. Before we get to the philosophical heart of the video, we need to clarify what Thoreau meant when he used the word simplify. Because that word, in our time, suffers from the same distortion that the man himself suffered, becoming a synonym for impoverishment, deprivation, scraping by. It's none of that. To simplify, for Thoreau, is to remove the unnecessary excess that steals time and peace. It's the difference between owning 3 good pieces of clothing you love wearing and owning 30 pieces among which you can't make up your mind every morning while the smell of reheated coffee drifts in from the kitchen. Think about a dinner. You can prepare 5 elaborate dishes, spend the entire afternoon in the kitchen, and serve a lavish table for a meal nobody will remember a week later. Or you can prepare just 1 dish with a few well-chosen ingredients, talking quietly with whoever's cooking alongside you, and serve a modest table that becomes a permanent memory. Both dinners cost money, both fed people. But only one was actually lived. The other was just executed. That's the key Thoreau offers. It's not about becoming poor or rejecting the comfort you legitimately earned over decades. It's about asking, item by item, area by area, what's essential and what's dead weight, and having the cool-headed courage, even if it stings, to subtract the dead weight so the essential can finally show up. From here on, the video heads in a direction you might not be expecting. We're going to step out of the philosopher's territory and into the territory of your own life. But what does it actually mean to be free? The real answer usually takes longer than the first one that comes to your lips. Most people, if pressed, would give vague answers. Doing whatever you want, not having to work, having enough money, traveling whenever you feel like it. They all have something true in them, but they all miss the mark. Because freedom, in the deeper sense, isn't the absence of obligations or permission to do whatever you want at any cost. Freedom is mastery over your own life. It's the ability to say yes to what matters and no to what distracts. The ability to choose how to react to a frustration instead of being dragged along by it. By the standard of true freedom, the busiest man can be the least free of all. The executive with a packed calendar and a fat paycheck can be nothing more than a well-paid servant. He doesn't control time. Time controls him. And at night, with his hand feeling the cold texture of the steering wheel in Friday's traffic jam, he scrolls his phone for an hour before bed because he no longer has the energy to consciously choose even his own rest. By that same standard, the simplest man can be the most sovereign. The retiree who chose to tend a small vegetable garden, who knows the neighbors by name, who reads in the morning and sleeps without an alarm, who says no to everything that doesn't fit what he decided to value at this stage of life, is free. Not because he has a lot, but because he has what he decided to have. Freedom isn't a quantity, it's a quality. And it depends far less on what you own externally than on what happens inside your head when you open your eyes. And that's exactly why the next idea is fundamental. No external change works while the mind stays enslaved. That sentence needs to land before we move on. Switching cities, jobs, partners, without changing on the inside is just switching prisons. You know people who changed everything in their lives and stayed exactly the same. They quit the job and within 3 months were anxious in the new one, ended a marriage, and before long were repeating the same patterns with the next partner. Moved cities looking for peace and packed the restlessness in their suitcase. Seneca, the Roman Stoic philosopher, wrote about this nearly 2,000 years ago in his Moral Letters to Lucilius. He observed, with a touch of irony, that many Roman noblemen would travel to faraway lands in search of tranquility and come back more agitated than when they left, because the source of the agitation traveled right along with them. Freedom begins in the head, in how a person interprets what they live through. 2 people can be in the same job, with the same boss. One walks out every day destroyed, seeing the work as a prison. The other walks out with energy to invest in other areas, seeing the job as a means to a larger life. It's not the job that's different. It's the interpretation that makes the difference. And the interpretation is internal. That doesn't mean objective situations don't matter. There are jobs that genuinely make you sick, relationships that need to end. But even those changes, in order to be liberating, have to come hand in hand with internal transformation. You change the set, but the actor stays the same. Here, it's worth pausing for some scientific evidence. The Harvard Study of Adult Development, conducted by Harvard University since 1938, is the longest longitudinal study ever done on what makes a human life good. We're talking more than 85 years of tracking, generation after generation, hundreds of men and their families. The psychiatrist Robert Waldinger, the current director of the study, summarized in his book The Good Life, published in 2023 with Mark Schultz, the central conclusion of nearly a century of data. It isn't money, it isn't status, it isn't professional success. What most consistently predicts a good life over the course of decades is 2 things: quality relationships and health. People who cultivated deep bonds and who took care of their bodies with at least some minimal attention lived happier, longer, and more mentally sound lives than people who chased external achievements at the expense of those 2 pillars. Think about what that means for you. You've already seen, in your own family or in your own circle, living examples of what this data confirms statistically. That uncle who got rich but died alone, bitter. That co-worker who never had great possessions but grew old surrounded by people who genuinely loved her. That cousin who chased titles his whole life, and when he finally stopped, discovered he no longer knew how to talk to his wife. The Harvard study is just confirming, with data, what Thoreau intuited through contemplation. People work themselves to exhaustion to pay for things they barely use, and in the process, they sacrifice the very 2 pillars that, according to the most serious study ever conducted on the subject, are the only ones that matter in the end. And when work finally comes to an end, in retirement, or in being let go, all that remains is the result of that ongoing neglect. And here's where the most uncomfortable detail of Thoreau's experiment shows up. The detail nobody usually tells you when they sum up Walden in pretty quotes for social media. I'll come back to it in a few minutes on the subject of greed, because that's where it'll make the most sense. Now, an important clarification before someone misreads what's coming next. Talking about simplicity isn't talking against money. That's one of the biggest misunderstandings in the contemporary discourse on the simple life. And it needs to be cleared up, honestly. Money is good. Having money lets you choose, travel, rest, take care of the people you love, have peace of mind when your health falters. It lets you say no to things that don't serve you because you don't depend on them to eat. Denying that is philosophical hypocrisy, usually coming from someone who's never gone through real financial hardship. Money is a powerful tool, and like every powerful tool, it can build or destroy, depending on who's holding it. The problem was never money itself. It was the infinite thirst for it. It was turning the means into the end. It was confusing net worth with meaning. Wanting to prosper is healthy. It's human. Wanting to give your kids a better life, to secure a dignified old age, to live without the pressure of paying the next bill, all of that is legitimate, and Thoreau would likely never have condemned any of it. What he condemned, and what truly deserves to be condemned, is the life that becomes a hostage to the next achievement. The guy who has more than enough to live comfortably, but keeps working 70 hours a week because, according to him, there's still a little ways to go. That little bit more that never arrives. Every time he reaches the little bit that was missing, the goalpost moves, and another little bit appears further down the road. 20 years later, he's exhausted. He's got money piled up, but he no longer has the health to spend it. He no longer has the marriage that fell apart along the way. And he closes the office door with that soft click that turns, without him noticing, into the sound of an entire life ending inside a single room. Wanting to prosper is healthy. Living as a hostage to the next achievement, that's the problem. The difference between desire and greed is one of the most subtle and most decisive in human experience. Desire is movement. It's what pushes life forward. It's the wanting to learn, create, prosper. Without desire, nobody writes a book, opens a business, plants a garden. Desire has a target, and when the target is hit, it rests. Another one might come along, sure, but there's a cycle of fullness between each accomplishment. There's satisfaction. Greed is a vacuum. It's a hole that never fills, and the more you put in, the emptier it gets. The greedy person hits the goal, and within minutes the goal loses its shine. It's already normal. It's already the starting point for the next one, which has to be bigger. He never arrives, because the finish line moves with him. He's a man walking on a treadmill going the wrong way. No matter how fast he walks, he stays in the same place emotionally. The new house feels normal in 3 months. The bigger paycheck feels normal in a month. And he needs more. Always more. And it's never enough. The practical difference between desire and greed is a question you can ask yourself right now. What you already have today, in quality of life, in achievements, in relationships, in material things, would it have been enough for the young person you once were? That young person who looked at the life you have now as a postponed promise? Probably yes. If that young person could see what you have today, they'd find it an abundant life, maybe even a moving one. And you? Do you feel that way about the life you have? Or can you only see what's still missing? What could be more, what the neighbor has and you don't? If the honest answer is the second one, it's not because your life is insufficient. It's because your goalpost moved without you noticing, and it'll keep moving unless you decide, consciously, to stop the goalpost and look at what's actually there. This act of looking at what's actually there leads us to the emotional heart of this video. And here we need to pause for a moment, take a breath. Because what comes next tends to land deep in adults who've lived long enough to have perspective. The greatest wealth in your life today, most likely, is the one you stopped seeing. Because it's already there. Because it became scenery. Because it slipped onto autopilot. The house where you live. Think about it for a second. It has a roof, walls, a bed, a kitchen, a bathroom with hot water. At some point in your story, this was something seen from a distance. The 20-year-old who shared a room with a sibling or who lived in a rented apartment falling apart dreamed of the house you have today. He dreamed of being able to close a door and have a space of his own, of being able to walk barefoot without worrying about anything. You have that. And when was the last time you looked at your house with gratitude instead of with frustration over what still needs to be fixed? The family you have, the parents who are still alive, even if they've gotten harder to handle with age. The partner who's been by your side for years, even if the two of you no longer talk like you used to. The kids who grew up, who maybe don't reach out as often as you'd like, but who are alive, healthy, building their own lives. At some point, all of that was a postponed promise, the health you still carry. Not the perfect health of your 20s, the possible health of your 60s, your 70s, the legs that still walk, the eyes that still read, the heart that still beats. Every day, people of your generation die. People end up bedridden. You're still here, watching this video, able to take in what it's saying, and the job, or the retirement, or the income that pays for your month. It doesn't matter how much it is. The fact is, you have enough to be here, without the dread of hunger in your stomach. Billions of people in the world don't. You do, and you stopped seeing it. The greatest human wealth is exactly that, the one that's already in your hands and that you stopped seeing. And the most transformative exercise there is simply to start seeing it again. Before we move on, do a small experiment. Pause the video if you'd like and look around the room you're in right now. Identify 3 concrete things, visible from where you are, that were once your dream and that today you don't even notice anymore. You don't need to do anything with that list, just acknowledge it. To help you out, check the pinned comment for some exclusive material made just for you. But there's a more treacherous psychological trap than that one, and it's probably operating in you at this very moment, even while you're trying to do the exercise I just suggested. It's a trap that steals the present so subtly that most adults spend decades under its effect without ever identifying it. I'll explain it in a few minutes. First, we need to talk about the capacity that gives a name to the antidote itself. There's a name for this ability to see again, to be present in what is, instead of chewing over what isn't. The spiritual traditions call it various things, and none of them require religion to make sense. Full attention, presence, mindfulness in contemporary vocabulary. You don't have to believe in anything to practice. You don't have to meditate 2 hours a day. The exercise is simple and free. Be where you are. When you eat, eat. When you talk, talk. Without the phone in your hand, without the mind in 3 places at once. Hurry blinds. Presence heals. The man in a rush watches the world go by without taking part in it. He goes from the couch to work to the supermarket without remembering anything clearly that happened along the way. The days blur together, the weeks blur together, the years blur together. And when he finally stops, usually in the middle of some crisis, he discovers he lived an entire decade on autopilot. Whoever learns to be present recovers life in scraps. A breakfast becomes a moment. A conversation with the kid becomes a memory. A Sunday walk becomes real rest, not an escape. You don't have to overhaul the whole routine, you just have to change the attention within it. And when the attention changes, everything changes, even with nothing external moving. That's the spiritual side of the simplicity Thoreau practiced on the shores of the pond. It wasn't prayer or ritual, it was just being and noticing. But there's something else that needs to be said, and this might be the most uncomfortable observation in the entire video. It hits a pattern so common, so socially accepted, so cultivated in family conversations and on social media, that almost nobody recognizes it as a problem. I'm referring to the modern habit of living other people's lives. The contemporary human being spends an absurd amount of mental energy preoccupied with lives that aren't their own. The neighbor who bought the new car, the celebrity who split with their partner, the stranger online who posted something controversial, the adult child who chose a career we don't approve of. Each of these attentions is an invisible bleed, and every minute spent judging someone else's life is a minute stolen from your own. Stop and do the math in your head. How much of your week do you spend thinking about lives that aren't yours? Talking about people who aren't in your direct circle? Looking at the profiles of folks you don't even really know? Probably a lot more than you realize. Because it became such an automatic habit that you don't even notice you're doing it, usually accompanied by the hum of the fridge in the empty kitchen at 3 in the morning, while the thumb keeps swiping down the screen. And here comes the uncomfortable question: why? Why do grown adults, with concrete problems in their own lives, with kids who need their presence, with marriages that need maintenance, with their own dreams that keep getting put off, spend so much time mentally managing somebody else's life? The answer is uncomfortable, because it requires less courage. Looking at someone else's life asks less of you than looking at your own. Judging the adult child takes less than admitting that maybe you weren't the example you would have liked to be. Commenting on the breakup of a famous couple spares you from looking at the silence that settled into your own marriage, or at the dinner table where 2 people eat in silence with the TV on at medium volume. Other people's lives function as entertainment and anesthesia at the same time. Psychology has a name for much of this pattern: gossip, judgment, surveillance over the neighbor, selective outrage against lifestyles different from our own. All of these are sophisticated forms of escape. When a person can't bear to look directly at their own life, they look at other people's, and while they're looking outward, they feel relieved of the obligation to look inward. This phenomenon has intensified absurdly in the era of social media, where every person has access, 24 hours a day, to the curated display of other people's lives. You wake up and the first thing you see is a meticulous selection of what other people chose to show. You compare, even without meaning to. You form an opinion on lives you don't live. And at night, when you lay your head on the pillow, you realize another day has gone by without you actually taking care of your own life. Whoever is at peace with themselves doesn't have the time or the inclination to manage other people's lives. That's a powerful practical test. The adults who seem most whole, most centered, most at peace, are almost always the ones who talk the least about other people. They take care of what's theirs, they handle what they have to handle, and they leave the rest alone. Not out of indifference to the world, but out of clear awareness that each of us has a plot of land to cultivate, and time only stretches enough for our own. The most agitated adults, the ones full of opinions about everything and everyone, are usually the ones running from something inside themselves. Constant outrage anesthetizes their own emptiness. Ceaseless judgment spares them the work of judging themselves. And the chronic exhaustion of someone who lives like that isn't from information overload. It's from the chronic waste of energy on someone else's territory. There's a concept in psychology that helps make sense of this pattern on a more technical level. The American psychologist Julian Rotter, in 1954, formulated the theory of locus of control. People with an internal locus of control believe that their life depends, fundamentally, on their own actions and responses. People with an external locus of control believe that their life depends on factors outside their reach, like other people, the government, luck, the unfairness of the world. Decades of subsequent research have shown, with impressive consistency, that people with an internal locus of control have better mental health indicators, greater resilience in the face of adversity, more life satisfaction, and greater success in long-term projects. Not because their lives are objectively easier, but because they position themselves as agents of their own existence, and not as victims of it. An internal locus of control doesn't mean denying that injustices exist in the world, or that there are factors outside our reach. It just means that, even in those contexts, we keep the question alive. What's under my control here? What can I do, on my end, with what's happening? That question, kept alive, is the difference between someone who grows through adversity and someone who's simply destroyed by it. Freedom, in practice, is taking the helm of your own ship. There's an old metaphor that appears at the end of the novel Candide, written by the Frenchman Voltaire in 1759, and that resonates perfectly with everything Thoreau wrote nearly a century later. After traveling the entire world, witnessing wars, earthquakes, betrayals, and absurdities of every kind, the character Candide reaches a conclusion that's almost disappointing in its simplicity. Instead of trying to fix the world, he decides it's better to cultivate his own garden, to work with his own hands on the small plot of land within his reach, and stop carrying the world on his back. That image is perhaps the most powerful summary of everything we've been discussing. Tending your own garden isn't selfishness or escapism. It isn't pretending that the world out there doesn't exist. It's recognizing, with grown-up humility, that what's within your reach is finite, that your energy is finite, that your time is finite, and that this limited supply has to be spent on what can actually be cared for by you. What's at hand for you is your body, the house where you live, your close relationships, the people who depend on you directly. That's your corner of the world. The rest is a world too big to be carried. When you take care of what's yours, it blooms. The people close to you feel loved. The place where you live becomes a refuge. Your body holds up longer. And the curious thing is that when many people start tending their own plots of land, the whole world gets better without anyone having had to save the world. It's the silent sum of many well-tended corners. When you abandon what's yours to try to tend the world, or worse, to judge somebody else's life, your own corner withers. The people close to you feel neglected. The body falls apart. The mind turns to swamp. And nothing out there gets better, because the world wasn't waiting on your care. Go back to the plot of land that's yours. That's the first half of the freedom Thoreau was proposing. The second half is in an even simpler place, and an even more ignored one. The present, the now. The only place where life actually happens. The past doesn't exist anymore. It's memory, mental construction, an edited version of what happened, filtered through years of rereading. You're not there anymore. The future doesn't exist yet either. It's expectation, anticipation, worry. You're not there yet. Only the now actually exists. And it's precisely the now that most people can't manage to inhabit. They live mentally in the past, chewing over what could have been, or in the future, rehearsing what hasn't come yet. And the present passes, right in front of them, without being lived. The kids grow up while the father is mentally somewhere else. The romances last while the bodies are together, but the minds are apart, in other eras. Most human suffering comes from this flight from the present. Chewing over what's past feeds regret. Fearing what's coming feeds anxiety. And between the two, the now, which would be the only place where life could be experienced, sits empty. You're here, but your mind isn't. And when the here passes, it's gone forever. Bringing your attention back to the now is, perhaps, the most liberating act available to a human being. And it's available for free, at any moment. You can do it now, in this very second. Feel the air entering your lungs. Notice the weight of your body in the chair or on the couch. Recognize that you're here, that this moment is your life happening, and that, in fact, it's the only moment in which it happens. There's no technique to learn, no master to seek out. It just requires the habit, trained little by little, of coming back to the now every time the mind drifts off. And it'll drift off many times a day. That's no problem. You just come back. And that repeated return over months and years becomes the fabric of a life finally lived in the first person. Let's come back to Thoreau one last time. That central line in Walden, that's perhaps the most important sentence he wrote in his life. And that makes more sense now, after everything we've talked about. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. There are layers in there that only show up on the second reading. To live deliberately, not by inertia or inherited habit, but with conscious choice. The essential facts of life, not the noise that other people's lives produce and that you decided to manage. To learn what it had to teach, to recognize that life itself is, in itself, a teacher, and that to live on autopilot is to skip class. Not to discover, when it's time to die, that I had not lived. The ultimate fear of the conscious human being, perhaps the only true fear. To reach the end and realize you passed through life without ever taking part in it. The question Thoreau lays out, and that this video lays out for you now, is just one, in 3 versions. Are you living or just reacting? Living your own life or tending other people's? Building what's yours or putting out other people's fires? If the honest answer is the second one, in any of the 3 questions, it's not time to blame yourself. It's time to reorient yourself, because life is still happening. The now is still yours, and the rest of the story is still wide open. We've reached the final part. And here, agreement isn't enough. Agreement without action is just one more modern habit. People read books on simplicity, save inspirational quotes on social media, and keep on living exactly the same. The information goes in. The life doesn't change. That's perhaps the biggest obstacle of our time. Knowing too much and doing too little. The final invitation, then, is practical, and it fits in 3 small movements for this week, woven into the natural flow of your days. Not as tasks to check off, but as directions of attention to try out. Start by looking at what already exists. At night, with the lights already off and the silence settling in, identify things you have today that were once just a postponed promise. The house, the family, the health, the spouse, anything concrete that the young person you once were would have considered a major achievement. Say it out loud to yourself, or jot it down on a piece of paper, just acknowledge it. This exercise, simple as it seems, tends to reposition your inner goalpost. You remember that you already arrived somewhere, that you have more than you think. Next, do the opposite movement, and maybe the harder one. Identify someone else's life that you need to step out of. It can be a judgment you carry about a family member, a piece of gossip you take part in every weekend, an annoyance with someone else's choices that don't depend on you, a profile on social media you follow just to get worked up. Pick one, just one, and let it go. Decide consciously that that life is none of your business, and that starting this week, you're going to invest that energy in the corner that's yours to tend. Lastly, and this is the most delicate gesture, choose one area of your own life to tend with more attention. It can be the body, with a daily walk or a doctor's appointment you've been putting off. It can be a relationship, a lunch with someone you've been neglecting, a phone call to a kid. It can be the home environment, opening the windows of forgotten rooms, letting the air in where it hasn't come in for months. It can be the mind, setting aside 30 minutes a day with no phone, just sitting, looking out the window. Choose one move, and do it with the presence of someone who has decided, at last, to show up to their own life. These 3 small gestures, done honestly over the course of a week, open up spaces inside you that have been closed for years. And in those spaces, something new can finally breathe. It might be a forgotten memory, a sleeping joy, or just the inner silence rediscovered after years of noise. Freedom isn't having more, it's carrying less. And a good chunk of what you're carrying isn't even yours. Thoreau didn't go to the pond. He went away from the noise. You don't need a cabin. You just need the courage to look at your own life honestly, to give thanks for what's already there, to let go of what isn't yours, and to tend to what is. That's the only freedom nobody can take away from you, because it doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. If this video made sense to you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones, and consider becoming part of our members club, where we go deeper into each one of these themes with exclusive content. See you next time.